The ceremony took place under the sunset of Naboo, with only C-3PO and R2-D2 present as witnesses. Padme wore a simple white dress, while Anakin wore his Jedi robes, both holding hands before the lake that reflected the last lights of the day. Words were exchanged in whispers, eternal promises sealed with a kiss that seemed to suspend time for a few precious moments. Neither of them imagined that that tranquil night would be the last peace they would share for a long time. The approaching war cast shadows over the galaxy, but in that moment, there existed only the love between two hearts that defied the rules. When morning came, Anakin had to leave, leaving Padme alone with the memory of that night and the weight of a secret that would change everything. 3 weeks had passed since Anakin returned to the front. The battles in the Geonosis system demanded his constant attention, but his thoughts always returned to Naboo and to Padme. He piloted his starfighter with the same deadly precision as always, destroying separatist droids with calculated movements, but a part of him remained distant. Obi-Wan noticed the occasional distraction of his former Padawan, but attributed it to the natural stress of war. Meanwhile, in Coruscant, Padme felt morning sickness that she initially confused with political stress. When she finally sought discreet medical help, the truth revealed itself as an unexpected and wonderful shock. She was pregnant, carrying within her the fruit of that single night shared with Anakin. The news reached Anakin through a coded message during a break in operations. He was in his cabin on the Star Cruiser when he read Padme's words for the third time, trying to process the full meaning of that revelation. Happiness and terror mixed in his chest, creating a whirlwind of contradictory emotions that threatened to suffocate him. A child was on the way, a new life he had helped create, but how could he protect this child while maintaining his bond with the Jedi Order? The code was clear about relationships and their consequences, and discovering his paternity would mean certain expulsion and possibly worse. Anakin looked through the window at the vacuum of space, feeling the weight of a responsibility that went far beyond the battles he faced daily. For the first time since becoming a Jedi Knight, he questioned whether he had chosen the right path. The Clone Wars exploded across the galaxy with devastating intensity. Anakin Skywalker found himself at the center of the conflict, leading clone troops in dozens of star systems against the Separatist forces. Each victory won increased his reputation, transforming him into the fearless hero that the Holonews celebrated. Alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi, he commanded entire fleets, executing impossible maneuvers that saved countless lives. But while General Skywalker marched from triumph to triumph, the man behind the title lived in constant agony. Padme remained in Coruscant, her belly growing week after week, forced to hide her condition with increasingly elaborate clothing. The meetings between them were rare, quick, clandestine, always under the risk of discovery. During a brief leave in Coruscant, Anakin managed a few precious hours with Padme in her apartment. She was 4 months pregnant, and for the first time he could touch the slight curve of her belly, feeling through the Force the tiny but undeniable presence of life growing there. Tears ran down his face uncontrollably, a mixture of absolute joy and paralyzing fear. Padme held his face in her hands, forcing him to look directly into her eyes as she spoke with a firm and determined voice. They would find a way to make it work, she promised, no matter how many obstacles rose in their path. Anakin wanted to believe those words, but a darkness in his heart whispered that the price of his happiness would be greater than either of them could imagine. When he left again for the war, he carried with him the image of Padme and his unborn child as a talisman against the horrors he would face. The arrival of Ahsoka Tano changed everything in ways Anakin did not anticipate. The Jedi Council decided he needed a Padawan, a young woman full of energy and determination who called him Sky Guy from the first day. Initially, Anakin resisted the idea, arguing that he wasn't ready to teach someone while he still had so much to learn. But Ahsoka quickly proved her worth in combat, saving his life more than once with impressive reflexes and admirable courage. They developed a natural partnership, a connection that went beyond master and apprentice, becoming something closer to battle siblings. As the months passed and Padme entered the 6th month of pregnancy, the weight of the secret became unbearable for Anakin. He looked at Ahsoka, saw her unwavering loyalty and transparent honesty, and realized he couldn't continue lying to someone who trusted him so completely. One night, after a particularly brutal battle on Christophsis, Anakin finally broke, telling the whole truth to his shocked Padawan, begging her to understand that he needed someone to trust before the pressure destroyed him completely. The 7th month of pregnancy brought changes impossible to hide, even with the most elaborate dresses. Padme observed her reflection in the mirror of her room in Naboo, where she had taken refuge far from the curious eyes of Coruscant. Her prominent belly housed not one, but 2 lives, a revelation that medical exams had confirmed a few weeks ago. Twins, she thought with a mixture of joy and concern. 2 children who would need a present father, not a ghost who appeared between battles. When Anakin arrived for a quick visit, she found him on the balcony overlooking the lake, his gaze lost on the horizon as if seeking answers in the calm waters. She approached slowly, placing his hand on her belly to feel the insistent kicks of the babies growing inside. Then she asked the question she had been rehearsing for weeks, her voice soft but firm cutting through the afternoon silence. "Anakin, wouldn't it be better to tell the council the truth?" Padme's words echoed in his mind as he tried to formulate an answer that made sense. She calmly explained that she had already requested official leave from the Senate for health reasons, a partial lie that would give her time until the babies were born. But what about after, she asked, how long could they maintain the farce with 2 children who would grow up asking about their father? Ahsoka, who had accompanied Anakin on that visit, remained silent, leaning against the wall, but her expression revealed total agreement with the senator's words. She had spent the last few months watching her master consume himself between 2 worlds, divided between duty and love. The young Togruta finally found courage to speak, her voice hesitant but sincere, crossing the tension in the air. "Master," she said, "you always taught me that the truth, however painful it may be, is better than living a lie that will eventually destroy us from within." Anakin resisted with all the arguments he could muster. The war needed him. Thousands of lives depended on his decisions on the battlefield. Abandoning everything now would be deserting when the Republic most needed its best defenders. He paced back and forth on the balcony, gesturing intensely as he spoke about responsibility, duty, and the sacrifice everyone made during those dark times. Obi-Wan trusted him. The clone troops would follow him to the ends of the galaxy. How could he simply turn his back on all of this? Padme let him speak until the words ran out, until silence returned to fill the space between them. Then she asked with devastating simplicity if he really thought he could be a good general while his heart remained light years away, worried about a family he could never publicly acknowledge. Anakin had no answer for that because deep down he knew she was absolutely right. The twins were born on a stormy night in Naboo, surrounded only by medical droids and Ahsoka's comforting presence. Padme went through hours of exhausting labor, squeezing Anakin's hand with enough force to break bones, as she brought Luke and then Leia into the world. When she finally held her children in her arms, one on each side, Anakin felt something inside him break and rebuild simultaneously. They were so small, so fragile, their wrinkled little faces and closed eyes completely dependent on him for protection and care. He touched each one's cheeks with trembling fingers, marveled by the absolute perfection of those little creatures who were part of him and part of Padme. The Force pulsed around the babies, a soft but undeniable glow that confirmed what he already knew in his heart. Those children would have the gift, would follow in his footsteps, and would need a father who was present to guide them. Not a distant legend they would only know through sporadic holoprojections. The first days with Luke and Leia transformed Anakin Skywalker in ways no battle ever had. He spent hours simply watching them sleep, memorizing every detail of their faces, every tiny sound they made. He changed diapers with a delicacy that contrasted absurdly with the hands that wielded lightsabers in Mortal Kombat. When Luke cried in the middle of the night, it was Anakin who ran to pick him up, rocking his son against his chest while walking around the room until the baby calmed down. Leia was calmer, but had a penetrating gaze even so small, as if she were already evaluating the world around her. On the 3rd day after birth, while holding both sleeping babies in his arms, Anakin finally understood what he needed to do. There was no turning back, no possible compromise. because those two tiny lives deserved more than crumbs of attention stolen between military campaigns. They deserved a whole father, present, capable of seeing them grow and learn and become who they were destined to be. The decision was made on a clear morning when the twins were only 5 days old. Anakin entered the room where Padme was breastfeeding Leia while Luke slept in his crib and simply announced that he would leave the Jedi Order. Padme raised her eyes, surprised but with cautious hope illuminating her face, tired from recent motherhood. He explained that he had already contacted Obi-Wan, requesting permission to return to Coruscant and present himself to the Council, that he would finally tell the whole truth without reservations or excuses. Ahsoka, who was sleeping in the next room, woke up with the voices and appeared at the door, still wearing sleepwear. When Anakin communicated his decision, she showed no surprise, only a sad but understanding smile. "Master," she said quietly, "can I go with you when you speak to the Council?" Anakin questioned why, fearing she felt obligated to support him in that difficult moment. Ahsoka's answer was simple and direct, loaded with a determination he recognized as a reflection of his own teachings. "Because if you're leaving, I'm going too. I can't continue in an order that condemns love and punishes honesty." The Jedi Council chamber was plunged in heavy silence when Anakin Skywalker entered with Ahsoka Tano at his side. Yoda, Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Plo Koon, and Ki-Adi-Mundi occupied their usual seats, their faces revealing different gradations of concern and curiosity before the urgent summons. Anakin remained standing in the center of the circular room, feeling the weight of all those gazes upon him. But for the first time in years, there was no fear or shame in his heart. He told everything without hesitation, from the secret wedding in Naboo to the birth of the twins a few days ago, his voice firm and clear echoing through the ancestral walls of the temple. Obi-Wan briefly closed his eyes, pain and understanding mixed in his expression, while Mace Windu kept his face impassive but with visible tension in his jaw. Yoda tilted his head, his ancient eyes studying the former knight with penetrating intensity before speaking with his characteristic syntax. "Chosen you have, young Skywalker, and honest about your choices you were. Rare this is." Anakin took a deep breath and completed his statement, affirming that he formally requested his departure from the Jedi Order, that he could no longer serve two masters, and that he chose his family above all. Before any council member could respond, Ahsoka took a step forward, her voice trembling slightly but loaded with absolute determination when she announced that she would also leave the Order, that her master had taught her about loyalty and truth, and that she could not remain in an institution that condemned the purest of human feelings. 2 years transformed Anakin Skywalker into someone he himself barely recognized when looking in the mirror. Life in Naboo, far from the battlefields and the suffocating politics of Coruscant, had given him something he never imagined possible: true peace. He woke every morning with Luke and Leia jumping on his bed, their laughter filling the house with a pure joy that drove away any remaining shadow in his heart. Padme flourished at his side, no longer hiding her love or living in fear of discovery, and that freedom made her even more radiant than he remembered. During the day, Anakin continued training Ahsoka in the property gardens, teaching her advanced lightsaber combat techniques and deepening her understanding of the Force. But now his teachings were different, tempered by the experience of fatherhood and the absence of the fear that once consumed him. The emotional balance Anakin had achieved in those 2 years allowed his power in the Force to grow in surprising ways. Without the anger, fear, and frustration that previously clouded his connection with the energy that permeated all things, he could feel the currents of the Force with crystalline clarity. He meditated every night after putting the children to bed, reaching states of consciousness that Jedi Masters spent decades trying to attain. Ahsoka watched admiringly how her former master had evolved, noting the calm that now radiated from him even in the most challenging moments. He was no longer trapped between opposing worlds, no longer torn by internal conflicts impossible to resolve. Anakin had found his center, and that center was his family, the love that anchored him and simultaneously elevated him to heights he would never reach alone. The decision to return to Coruscant and offer his services to the Republic was not made lightly. Anakin and Ahsoka discussed the matter at length, weighing the responsibilities they had to the galaxy against the tranquil life they had built. Padme was the one who encouraged Anakin to at least make the offer to the council, arguing that he would never be completely at peace with himself if he didn't try to help. Luke and Leia, now 2 years old and already demonstrating impressive sensitivity to the Force, seemed to sense their father's restlessness. When Anakin and Ahsoka finally departed for Coruscant, it was with the promise to return soon and with the understanding that he would not return to being the same reckless warrior as before. The council received them with surprise and caution, Yoda studying Anakin with those ancient eyes before declaring, "Changed you are, Skywalker, powerful in the Force also." The opportunity to prove his worth came faster than anyone expected. Obi-Wan Kenobi contacted Anakin personally with an urgent request for help to rescue Chancellor Palpatine, captured by separatist forces and held prisoner aboard the flagship Invisible Hand in orbit of Coruscant. Anakin looked at Ahsoka, who nodded with barely contained enthusiasm, and then accepted the mission without hesitation. They met with Obi-Wan in the temple hangar, and for the first time in 2 years the three were reunited again. Obi-Wan embraced Anakin firmly, whispering that he had missed him every day. As their starfighters took off toward the space battle unfolding over the capital, Anakin felt gratitude for being able to help his former master without sacrificing everything he had built. The infiltration of the Invisible Hand was chaotic, as Anakin remembered from old missions. When they finally found the Chancellor in chains, Dooku emerged from the shadows before they could free him. Obi-Wan assumed a combat position, but Dooku used the Force to hurl heavy debris against the Jedi Master, knocking him unconscious. Anakin shouted for Ahsoka to take care of Obi-Wan while he advanced against the Sith Lord with controlled determination. The duel was different from any previous confrontation. Anakin didn't attack with blind fury, but with impeccable technique. In less than 2 minutes, he disarmed Dooku and knocked him to the ground. Palpatine shouted his orders. "Kill him! Do it!" Anakin turned to look at the Chancellor and perceived the manipulation in those words. He no longer had the hatred of years ago, only the certainty that Dooku would face appropriate judgment. Dooku was taken to a maximum security facility, but on the third night suffered an attack that nearly killed him. He survived by a narrow margin, and that betrayal broke his last vestiges of loyalty to Palpatine. At the trial, Dooku revealed that the Chancellor was actually Darth Sidious, a Sith Lord manipulating both sides of the war. He provided locations of evidence that confirmed each accusation. The Senate entered chaos while investigators verified everything, finding encrypted communications and Sith artifacts hidden in Palpatine's office. The Jedi Council requisitioned Dooku for appropriate punishment, and surprisingly the Senate agreed. Meanwhile, Palpatine's trial dragged on for weeks, each day revealing new layers of his elaborate conspiracy. As the walls closed in and conviction became inevitable, Palpatine finally abandoned any pretense. Then he pronounced the fateful words, Order 66, activating hidden programming in the clones that instantly transformed them into Jedi executioners throughout the galaxy. The council chamber was filled with tension when Dooku was brought in to receive his sentence. Anakin had been invited to participate in the deliberation, a rare recognition of his contribution to capturing both Dooku and exposing Palpatine. Ahsoka waited outside, restless, sensing through the Force that something terrible was about to happen. Yoda, Mace Windu, and Obi-Wan observed the prisoner in silence, weighing decades of betrayal against his recent cooperation. It was then that the unmistakable sound of boots marching in formation echoed through the temple corridors, hundreds of them, advancing with deadly purpose. Order 66 had been activated, but this time the clones would not find Jedi unprepared and scattered across the galaxy. This time, the Masters and Knights were gathered in force within the temple, prepared to defend their sacred home. Dooku rose from his shackles, his voice laden with genuine urgency crossing the chamber. "Give me a saber, let me help defend this place. I owe you this." Mace Windu looked at the former master with deep distrust, denying the request with unshakable firmness. He ordered Anakin to remain in the chamber guarding the prisoner while the other masters descended to organize the defense at the main entrance. Anakin nodded, but immediately called Ahsoka, asking her to enter and stay by his side. Down below, the sounds of combat began to echo through the ancestral walls, the hum of lightsabers clashing against blaster volleys creating a chaotic symphony of war. The battle at the temple entrance was brutal from the first moment. The clones of the 501st advanced in perfectly coordinated formations, their weapons firing without hesitation against the Jedi they had commanded just hours before. Yoda and Mace Windu led the defense, their sabers moving in blurs as they deflected shots and coordinated the other knights. But the clones were many, trained specifically to kill Force users, equipped with heavy weapons and anti-Jedi tactics. Agen Kolar fell first, surrounded by a dozen soldiers whose simultaneous shots overwhelmed his defenses. CC Tin tried to reach him, but a thermal grenade exploded at his side, throwing him against a column with fatal force. The terrible reality settled among the defenders. Even with superior numbers, they were rapidly losing ground. The younglings, children still learning the ways of the Force, fled in panic from the dormitories as the clones advanced deeper into the temple. They ran through the corridors guided by instinct and fear, eventually finding refuge in the council chamber where Anakin, Ahsoka, and Dooku remained. The children huddled in corners, their eyes wide with terror as the sound of battle drew ever closer. "Master Skywalker, what are we going to do?" said one of the younglings, frightened. Anakin looked at those young faces and felt something break inside him. A protective fury that had nothing to do with the dark side, but everything to do with defending the innocent. He turned to Dooku, his eyes burning with absolute determination, and simply nodded toward the youngling's sabers. Dooku understood immediately, taking one of the weapons, its familiar weight in his hand bringing memories of decades ago, when he himself was a defender of the light. The clones were almost reaching the council chamber when energy beams suddenly struck them from behind. Mace Windu and Yoda turned, surprised, and saw Anakin Skywalker emerging from the corridor like a living storm, his blue saber cutting through white armor with devastating efficiency. Ahsoka fought at his side, her movements perfectly synchronized with the Master's, while Dooku, wielding only a youngling's saber, used decades of experience to attack the invaders. Together, the three pushed the clones back, creating space for the wounded Jedi to retreat and regroup. Anakin didn't fight with anger or hatred, but with crystalline clarity of purpose, each movement calculated to protect without unnecessarily taking lives. But even with his aid, the clones continued advancing, their ranks replenishing faster than the Jedi could repel. Anakin realized that brute force would not win that battle. He retreated to an elevated platform, closed his eyes, and extended his consciousness through the Force in ways he had never attempted before. He searched for the minds of the 501st soldiers, men he had briefly commanded before leaving the war, men whose signatures in the Force he recognized individually. He found them trapped in a trance of behavioral programming, their true selves buried under layers of mental conditioning. With all the power he had developed during 2 years of perfect balance, Anakin plunged into those minds and began to undo the invisible shackles. "Stop," he commanded, his voice echoing not through the air but directly in their consciousnesses. "You are not assassins, you are soldiers of the Republic, and I, General Anakin Skywalker, order you to stop." One by one, dozens of 501st clones lowered their weapons, confusion and horror filling their faces as they awakened from the nightmare and realized what they had almost done. Anakin opened his eyes and gave the final order. "Leave the temple now." They obeyed, marching out while the council masters observed with absolute astonishment the impossible feat they had just witnessed. Dooku knew what he needed to do. While the Jedi reorganized their defenses and treated the wounded, the former Sith Lord slipped out of the temple, following the dark trail in the Force that would lead him to his former master. He found Palpatine in the Senate building, the Sith Lord surrounded by clone guards loyal exclusively to him. The confrontation was brief but intense, Dooku fighting not to win, but to create an opening. When he finally succeeded, he advanced through a storm of Force lightning, the youngling's saber in his hand finding Palpatine's heart even as the dark energy consumed his own body. Both fell together, master and apprentice united in death just as they had been in darkness. Days later, when Anakin was formally invited to return to the Jedi Order not just as a member, but as a master in recognition of his deeds and wisdom attained, something extraordinary happened. During the ceremony, as the entire council watched, the phantom forms of Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn manifested in the Force, visible to all present. Qui-Gon smiled with pride at his almost Padawan who had finally found redemption, while Dooku simply nodded to Anakin, silently acknowledging that the young man had chosen better than he himself had ever managed.